So, yeah, within the harmonized scale, this is actually a really interesting one. We just got a diminished triad, right? So we know that in the harmonized scale, the diminished triad is it's the triad that's in the half diminished chord, right? So this would be a seventh chord. So we have 7, 1, and that seems like our only possibility, right? So yeah, that's true. Now, the thing is about the diminished chords is that the fully diminished chord rather than a half diminished chord is symmetrical, and so you'd be stacking your thirds. Just the way the chord is built, you could keep doing that, and then basically how you invert it is just the same chord over and over again. You know, like you know how Yngwie does this. It's kind of the same thing where we got our chords here. Cool. So this again, if we're being strict here, it's kind of like, okay, well, we've got this chord to this chord, so that's 7, 1, you know, and that's the only possibility. But because that just like we had a G to A minor earlier, and they were just triads, that G could have been a G major 7, or it could have been a G dominant 7, and we were leaving out the 7s so that it wasn't explicitly out there, you know. It could have been either or, which means it could have been in two different keys. Same thing here. What people will do is, instead of playing a half diminished chord, you could take your diminished triad that's within it and then move it around symmetrically, which would be a full diminished chord rather than half diminished chord. And each one of those could then pivot you to a new key. So basically within your diminished chord, you've got like 4 options. Or, yeah, 4 options. So you have like, think of it like 7, 1 every time. 7, 1 every time. So you could be in the key of G, or you could be in the key of B flat, or you could be in the key of D flat, right? Or you could be in the key of E, which is the first one we did, I think, yeah? So I'm just going to walk through it again. You got the key of E, or no, we didn't. The first one was the key of G. So yeah, you've got the key of G, then you got the key of B flat, then you got the key of D flat, and then you've got the key of E flat, or E. Yeah, E. Cool. Yeah, so that one's kind of fascinating. We'll come back to that one. So those are all just chords that are kind of like side by side, right? Like you got 1 chord and the 2 chord, or the 2 chord and the 3 chord, and which one had the most possibilities? That last one, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with 3 half steps, right? Your flatted third intervals. We were in this, and that's where we found out like where our 7 chords would begin, and wherever our 7th chord started, we could follow it up with a 1 chord. You don't have to. You're the key you're in is not always a fret or a half step above your diminished chord. You know what I mean? So like if I played the 7th chord like this, and then I played it like this, now technically I'm leaving the realm of a diatonic 7th chord, because this is working from the diminished scale, a fully diminished chord, not a half diminished chord, right? So it's like when we changed the one note of the B minor, we flatted the 5th, and suddenly we went from being a 3 chord to a 4 chord to being a 7 chord to a 1 chord. That was from us flattening the 5 of the 3 chord. So we changed a note, and that's kind of a gateway to modulating from one key to another. We changed one note of a relationship that had a lot in common. So we didn't make any wild changes. We took the fact that the 3 and the 4 chord is a minor to major, and they're a half step apart, that's very unique, you know, rather than being a whole step apart and being major to minor, which could be found in 2 cases, which was our first one, right? The 1 and 2 or the 5 and 6. Well, in this case, there's only one instance of a half step apart minor to major, and that's the 3 chord to the 4 chord. However, the 7 to the 1 is very close. The only difference is the flat 5. And so what we did is like we took our 3 chord and flatted the 5th, and suddenly we changed into a new key. When we went to the C chord, that C chord was now the 1 chord. That's why we pivoted key that way. So with the diminished chord, the note that you're changing is the 7th, basically, because naturally it's a half 7. I'm sorry, half diminished, which is a flat 7. Root, flat 3rd, flat 5, your diminished triad, and the flat 7. Now, if you flat the 7 again, so it's a double flat, then you have a diminished chord. And that's the one note that would pivot you to a new key, right? Could basically by moving it symmetrically. So we have this would be like, you could still do 7, 1 with a fully diminished chord. Or changing key to E, or the key of D flat. And here's actually another cool point, is you don't have to modulate just because you started on a different root. Because if you're doing fully diminished chords, this are all the same notes every time. So what you could do, you could modulate to any of those 4 keys from that. I mean, 1 wouldn't technically be a modulation because it would be the key you're already in. So you could modulate to those 3 keys, or you could just stay within the one you're at. So check this out. Imagine that you had a progression that went F sharp, half diminished, to G. You got 7, 1. Then imagine you go, well, instead of doing half diminished, I'll do fully diminished. But you can still do the same thing, right? We changed that one note that kept it diatonic. And you're doing 5, 1. Now what you could have done is you could have gone like you're going to go to the key of E, but instead you stay in G. You didn't have to modulate just because you could, you know? So you could have your... So now we have like, there's these hidden diminished chords in our major diatonic scale. I mean, they're not really diatonic exactly, right? Because we flatted the 7th of our 7th chord, which has already had a flat 7. So it's a double flat 7. That made a diminished triad with a double flat 7 to a fully diminished chord. Those hidden diminished 7th, like full diminished 7th chords, are the F sharp, which is the almost diatonic one, and then all of its inversions, which would be A, C, and D sharp. A, C, and D sharp. So if you did an A, C, and D sharp in your ordinary scale, like our ordinarily harmonized scale, you'd have like G. Maybe you do A diminished. And you thought, what key am I in here? Where does this A diminished come from? Well, one thing you could say is that this is just an inverted 7th chord, right? Which would have been the F. Not technically diatonic because it'd have to be half diminished, and then half diminished isn't symmetrical. But you could look at it that way. It's like, okay, here's my 7th chord. So it's like this would be 7, 1. Again, not technically a diatonic 7th. Sorry, I repeat that over and over again, but I just want to be clear. This would be the same progression as this. So you could go... Yeah, exactly. Exactly the same notes. They're just in a different order. So basically, you could do your diatonic harmonized scale like this. You know, that's obviously a horrible voice thing, but just doing the really basic ones that are super obvious. And this one I should just do regular diminished because I'm not doing 7ths yet. But if you add your diminished 7th chord, the fully diminished chord, into all that, you'd have what I say was F sharp, A, C, and D sharp. D sharp. Yeah, so you'd have G, A diminished, A minor, B minor, C diminished, C, D, D diminished, D sharp diminished, I mean, E minor, and then your F sharp diminished to your G. You know, I just added I added one chord and all of its inversions, right? It's just a weird example where the inversions are thought of as different chords, like an A diminished and a an A diminished and a C diminished are the same chord. They're just inverted. Now, of course, you could use that to change key. This is pretty fancy. Like this is next step. There's something I wanted to do to exercise before we got to this point, but now I'm already doing it. So we'll come to that in a moment. But basically, it's like this. You got your G to your 7 chord, which I've altered, double flatting the 7 to make it fully diminished, and then I could change key to the key of B flat. Right? And that's a way to modulate using diminished chords. So I'd have like 1 chord, 7th chord with that one change. And so then I could have a chord progression that basically goes between a G and a B flat. And I did it, it's even when I don't do it, it's secretly because of that diminished chord. Because if I took the note the note that makes that half diminished is an E, and when we make it fully diminished, it becomes an E flat. So if I look at my A diminished chord and I go, where's my E flat? I go, oh, it's right here. Well, let me make it an ordinary E. That would be my inverted half diminished chord. And so what would happen would be G be your 1 chord, let's assume. And then you go to the 7th chord of the key of B flat, which would be the A half diminished, and then you go to your B chord, or your B flat chord. And then you modulate it that way, So another example would be like, let's say you were doing a 1 chord, to this would be an interesting example. So you go to 1 chord to a C diminished. Cool. And you could follow, and then you could just go back to the key of G. Like you can look at this as being in the key of G, right? It's that fully diminished chord that's not technically diatonic because it's not a half diminished. It's fully diminished. But that's how you can come up with that C diminished. So you could have a G chord, C diminished, G chord. C diminished, you could have a C chord, and back to G. So it's kind of like you got your 1 chord, your kind of wonky 7 chord, which is inverted and not really fully honestly a 7 chord, and then your 4 chord and 5 chord. And that's all within the key of G, with that one little liberty taken. Or you could use that and call that the 7th chord of D flat. Right? And the way to make that, if you want to make it a little more subtle, it would be like you play your 1 chord to a C diminished. If you want to make it then half diminished, I don't know if this is more subtle or less subtle actually, but you make it half diminished. And now it has to be a 7th chord because only one half diminished chord in a diatonic scale. So that is going to be your 7, 1, 7, 1. You could have your G, your 1 chord, and if you went to C half diminished, that's kind of maybe a little bit. It's okay, but it's a little bit forced in a way, as where if you take your G to C diminished, which is a slightly changed 7 chord, one note change, then change another note, so now it's 2 note changed, and that's the note that pivoted you into a new key. See what I'm talking about? So the way to make your transition from key to key more subtle is to change the least notes possible, right?